to the earning curve. The earning curve is a new platform in webinars and very different from others you may have attended in the past. So you, as the audience, drive all the panel questions. My name is Mary Ann Biangardi, and I'm the head of business development at Commercial Chalora & Company. Today's topic, we're talking about how to hire the right sales team. So this morning, we'll explore ways to do just that. If you are joining us today, you're likely interested in the best ways to evaluate sales talent and hiring strategies. Maybe you just want to know more about onboarding or validating and measuring sales performance. Our experts can help you with all of these questions and more. Since you all drive the panel, we need you to send us some questions. In order to send us those questions, find the thought bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. So type in the questions and we'll get them answered. Let's get started with some introductions. And by the way, my hair is glowing. You're not imagining that. This is because there's a light coming in from the window that I cannot stop because of they just switched out the blinds. So if you notice green hair, that's why. But I'm told I can pull it off. I don't know how. So Kim Baker, let's welcome Kim. She's our anchor panelist today. Kim is with Vivid Performance Group, and she's an award-winning sales representative, sales manager and leader in global sales training, and development function of global medical and device manufacturers. She has over 25 years of sales experience in manufacturing, medical diagnostics and devices, IT, and professional services, and she works with organizations to hire, assemble, and train the right individuals. Fun facts about Kim. Kim loves the thrill. She has performed a tandem, skydive, and acrobatic sailplaning in Arizona. She zoomed at 190 miles an hour around the Daytona Speedway, and at age 40, she took trapeze lessons from the famed Flying Melendez. Angie Gilbert, welcome Angie. Angie's with ALG Reserve. As the visionary and founder of ALG Reserve, Angie has 12 years of experience handling all the facets of corporate business development. She's savvy and sought-after business professional who helps corporations and individuals establish their presence in an ever-changing and competitive marketplace. Fun facts about Angie: she's a skilled roller skater, and she loves roller skating as a workout, and she's a novice fisherwoman, and recently has been on learn how to trout fish, and she loves it. Jamie Nunnally is our next panelist with NSR Talent. Welcome, Jamie. Jamie is the president of NSR Talent, a St. Louis-based search firm specializing in hiring top sales, HR, and recruiting professionals. She has over 15 years of experience helping St. Louis business leaders in the areas of hiring, sales, recruiting, interviewing, offer negotiation, onboarding, and retention. Fun facts about Jamie: in her personal life, she enjoys travel, Pilates, hiking, reading, and planning the next adventure. She's also an avid skier, and she collects Super Mario Brothers games. Welcome, Jamie. And Christy Jones, welcome, Christy. Sales Acceleration Group. Christy is the go-to expert in the SaaS companies who want to build or scale their teams. Christy has 19 plus years as a sales leader, helping founders increase revenue through improved strategy, process, and people. Her willingness to get her hands dirty and take no prisoners approach when helping companies is what makes her so valuable to her clients. Fun facts about Christy: she interviewed Dennis Hopper at age 17, and she is a true crime junkie. Welcome, Christy. Ryan Dretsch from Spoke Marketing. Welcome, Ryan. Ryan is the founder of Atomic Revenue, an expert in the field of marketing and sales enablement. Ryan is currently the VP of Sales Enablement at Spoke Marketing and has previously led 50-plus sales teams to #1 corporate performance. Ryan has a keen sense of both the finance requirements and performance measurements needed to guide efficient profitability and cash flow for organizations. Fun facts about Ryan: he dressed someone for the Academy Awards when he was working at Ralph Lauren Polo in the 90s. I believe it was a black turtleneck and gray pants, or the other way around. It was one of the guys who wins, like the behind-the-scenes guys, but still, it's cool. We all love this. So let's go ahead and get started. Kim, I'll start with you as our anchor panelist today. let's talk about hiring the right salesperson. Can you give us a few of your ideas on the best practices to hire the right salesperson?
Sure. And I would start out by saying that, kind of the 4 best practices I go to transcend hiring for any role, but we're going to speak to salespeople specifically today. So number 1 is you want to have an accurate job description. And when I say accurate, you really need to outline the key competencies and performance metrics for the salesperson. I would say number 2 is definitely engage a recruiter, and a recruiter who really has some experience in hiring for sales. Sometimes you even find sales recruiters who specialize in hiring for certain sales roles in certain verticals. The other thing that is so important is to have a standardized interview process or a hiring process, right? That's important so that not only you make sure that you're evaluating every candidate in the same way, but it also is really great for legal protection, right? You don't want to create any disparate impact and discrimination. And then finally, something I'm really, really passionate about is, as part of your standardized hiring process, is to utilize scientifically validated third-party assessments. And this enables you to make sure that you are hiring the right candidate to match the role, but also the sales culture of the organization. So I would say that's my top 4.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Kim. Would anybody else like to add anything? We kind of have an open floor when we ask these questions, and then the panelists can kind of pass the questions around if they want to, and then also send your questions up to chat. This is for the audience over here.
Marianne, I'll jump in. I think, again, Kim hit the nail on the head in so many ways. Because I work with mostly SaaS startup companies, I think the other thing is really understand what you're looking for and what you're trying to build. So again, as an earlier stage companies that I normally help hire for, a lot of times, there's so many different sales roles out there. And so, are you really looking for a true hunter, which most times my clients are looking for true hunters? Are you really looking for more of an account management? Do you want, are most of your leads coming inbound? Do you need them to go outbound? So I think the other thing that sometimes sales leaders struggle with is really the expectations of that particular job. And, when I talk to candidates, they say, I want to be in sales. And I go, but what kind of sales? Because there's so many different options. And so back to Kim's point about the job description, making sure that I always say, I'm writing the job description with the big red bow to attract some, but also I say in there hey, if this isn't you, probably not a good fit for us. So, if you're not interested in making 50 outbound calls a day, or if you're not interested in, pursuing a vertical that maybe you're not passionate about, now would be the time. So I think almost as important as knowing kind of not only the role, but what would work and what wouldn't work.
Just realized I had to unmute over there. Okay, thank you, Christy. And we do have a question from Jay King in the chat box here. He wants to know, do we have any suggestions for assessment resources?
Yeah, certainly I can speak to that. So let me say a couple things. First of all, there are a lot of assessment providers out there. Not all of them produce good quality assessments. So some things to know when choosing an assessment is you want to make sure that it actually predicts what you need it to predict. So for sales, we're looking to hire an individual based upon being able to predict their success in sales. Now, different sales roles, as Christy was saying, can require different competencies. There are different sales cultures. So just understand the kind of individual you need. Typically what I see people assessing for is, especially, where Christy's living and breathing in the SaaS world, definitely probably going to be using some cognitive ability. I see personality, and then also kind of a culture fit. So motivators, values, preferences. I do a lot of work in medical device and pharmaceutical. In that space, we don't necessarily worry so much about the cognitive ability because we're hiring people with experience. So a lot of times we're more looking to say, okay, can you do the job from a personality standpoint, and are we the right culture fit? And that culture fit, a lot of times we look at recognition, power, affiliation, and commerce. In some startups, the money's just not there. So if I'm looking at somebody who's high commerce, might not be the right fit. But if they want power and to be able to create and work with a team, might be a better fit. So a lot of providers out there ask for scientific validation. The other thing you want to do is ask them to prove to you that this assessment does not create disparate impact. That'll get you in trouble with the EEOC, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with that. Certainly, if anybody has more questions, put it in chat or reach out. But that's a big thing, is you want to ask any assessment provider to make sure this will not create disparate impact.
Marianne, I would tag onto that because Kim's got a lot of experience in this area, and she's right. There are so many different assessments, and like right now I'm working with 3 different clients, and we're using 3 different assessments. I offer one, and then there are 2 others out there. But the question I asked the founder is, well, what are we looking for with the assessment, right? I sometimes they send me the assessment. I go, this is great. How does it compare to other candidates or other employees? The other thing is it's a tool in the toolbox, right? So you need to have a formal interview process, which I think we're going to talk about a little later on. But that's just one measure, right? That's just one piece of information. I use those assessments so that I can then do another interview off of that information. But understand that I don't think assessments necessarily are what I would consider pass-fail. It's just another tool in the toolbox for you to gain additional information outside of a formal interview situation.
Yeah, you would probably look, the way I work with assessments, we would look at it to add maybe 30%, to consider the assessment, consider the person's, how they perform through the interview, and certainly consider their experience.
Sorry, I want to see if I was off mute here. Thank you, Kim, and let me get to the next question here really quick. Hold on. Sorry, I lost my chat box. The sun is really in my eye over here. Okay, how can we ensure a consistent interview process for all candidates? Who would like to start with that?
I can speak to that if you like. I would say just to make sure you have a defined process. You start with your first phone interview, what that covers, and I know we're going to go through some of it, but in your first interview, you go through their basic information, commute, compensation, background, where they worked. And you want to talk to them and sell them on your company, get them excited about your opportunity. Some people use the first interview to rule out candidates, and I think that's a mistake. You want to get them excited about you and then rule them out and disqualify them later in the process after you determine if they're a good fit or not. So think about what attributes your company has that a salesperson will like, and you go through and interview them on the basic pieces. And then in further interviews, we go through behavioral-based questions, adaptability, planning, things like that, qualifying their quota metrics and their KPIs, what they've done in previous roles. But you want to make sure you have a multi-step approach. And if you factor in the assessments, everyone does that different. I have a lot of clients that want to do that the last step, but I lean towards what Christy said and doing it in the middle so that you can use that assessment to ask your final interview questions and really make sure they're the right fit.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Does anybody else want to add anything? Is there any specific behavioral assessment or any of these? Is there anything you guys would recommend? Like any specific tools?
So when you just look at an assessment linked to sales, what we're looking for are assessments that measure a sales competency. And different assessments will maybe term it differently, but many times get at the root of the same thing. So does somebody have ambition? Can they handle stress? Can they build relationships? Or just some of the key areas. And, do they have, again, that ambition is that drive. So you can use different types of assessments to get at that. The key thing is just making sure your provider can demonstrate to you that their assessment actually measures that and that the way they measure it can be a predictor for successful performance.
Perfect. Thank you.
If I can add to Janie's point about companies selling themselves. So not only is the candidate being interviewed, they are interviewing the company as well. And salesmen and saleswomen are unique. They're a unique group of professionals. They beat to their own drum. They're a lot like us in design. They're entrepreneurs. They manage a territory. They've got an area of expertise. You know, a lot of the times they've got tons of experience and value add to the company. And so for corporations, it's important that they learn that they sell the sizzle of their corporation and find out what the motivation for the candidate is, whether if it is being a compliment to their organization, whether that looks like compensation package, incentives. It's important that the companies also sell, you know, who they are and what they bring to the table, because likely the candidate is actively interviewing if have a seat at the table with that organization. So I think it is critical that the company understands that they have to sell themselves as well.
Thank you, Angie. We have a question here. Hold on just a second. What factors should you include to evaluate someone's total sales potential? Kim, first, you want to start with that?
Sure. So again, it's going to depend upon the type of sales role. So is it a hunter role? Is it a gatherer role, right? So if you start with saying it's a hunter role, we're going to look at people who are very high in ambition, probably value power. They might be driven by money. So a lot of times when you use these assessments, you're going to be working through a consultant. So, you know, the assessments that I use, I'll speak to that. We look at 3 parts of personality. We look at kind of what motivates you to make sure that you're in the right sales culture. We look at how you go about day in and day out getting your goals accomplished. So do you use your sociability? Are you high in prudence? Are you high in ambition, right? The other thing that we'll look at is any kind of self-defeating behaviors. We do know, at least based upon the tools I use, that there are some self-defeating behaviors that harm salespeople. Like if you're too reserved or too cautious, that's not necessarily a good thing. I explain this to people in kind of a way that we typically all kind of shake our heads. We get hired for what we know and what we can do, and we get fired for who we are and how we behave. So the tools that I use really get to that underneath, who you are and how you will likely behave. In ways that maybe you're not even fully aware of. So I know that's not, you know, like 5 set answers, but it's subjective in terms of what your role is and what your organization needs.
Marianne, I'll tag onto that. One of the things that I say is the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, which is why I spend so much time with behavioral-based interview questions. So I normally, and Kim mentioned it earlier, I give my clients a list of 20 competencies, ask them to pick 8, and I build interview questions around those specific to that organization and the competencies that they have said are important to make a successful employee at their company. Obviously, sales is one of those competencies, but there are other competencies that are important as well. But, you know, even if somebody has not had a long track record of sales, asking questions about how they process, you know, again, those behavior-based questions about tell me about a time when, whether even if it's a personal situation, it really is how do they process, what are their critical thinking skills, strategic thinking skills. But if you can put it in a business scenario, it's more likely that they will react the same way in the future. And so it's a little more predictable. You've got a little more understanding of expectations of the employee. And then I try to match those with the supervisor, right? So it looks like Kim will react this way in that situation. You know, Jamie, how do you feel about that? Like how will that work for you? And so I start to kind of, you know, towards the later end of the sales process or the interview process, try to match, you know, try to start to set some expectations and help everybody understand that I truly do believe the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, even if you've learned from your mistakes, right?
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that too. If you're not using an assessment, there are questions you can ask yourself. Christy has some behavioral ones. I have some meat and potatoes questions, like what's the size of your territory? Who are the client targets that you're calling on? Are they focused on enterprise level accounts, mid-market accounts, small businesses? Do they talk to small business owners, or are they talking to CIOs or CEOs? So you have to make sure your person's at the right level of your position by really validating who they're talking to, what vertical. Are they in healthcare? Are they in finance? Are they in technology? Ask those questions about, you know, what are their KPIs? I ask them, what's your annual revenue goal? What's your monthly revenue goal? How many calls do you make per day? How many meetings do you have per week? You have to get into the meat and the potatoes of what do they do every day. If I require that someone calls 50 plus people a day and has 10 meetings a week, and they're at 10 calls a day and 2 meetings a week, they're probably not going to handle my environment well. So just asking those questions about what do they do daily in their role is also just as important as the behavioral piece that sometimes people forget about, I guess. You want to make sure you get the core stuff down too.
That's absolutely true. Good advice. Okay, so we've got another one here. What are the consequences of hiring poorly in sales? What are the most common mistakes companies make in evaluating sales talent?
I can speak to that too, but Angie, do you want to jump in?
Well, a poor hire, obviously it's a reflection of your corporation, right? And so sales professionals are the brand. They're the bread and butter of your organization. And so they're interacting with the customer hopefully on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And so if there's high turnover, that creates a space of distrust among the customers. It creates a space of gossip and whispers and uncertainty amongst the customers. And so a poor hiring choice or decision, it's poor, it's bad all around. It's a negative reflection within the company as a whole. And so getting a grip on that and working with a recruiting partner or HR specialist that is an expert in staffing, that's critical because it drives your bottom line. It really does. It's the reputation that you have with your customer. And that's what I'm going to say. I'll digress.
I can add on to that too. I would say the biggest mistake people make is hiring based on their gut. Oh, I like Angie, I'm going to hire her. Her and I can go fishing together. Like, let's not hire on our gut. Validate their performance, check their references that aren't the ones that they provide you, like their previous managers. Everyone's going to give you the reference of people that can say whatever they want. I would just say validate the results. If you're talking to a salesperson, a good one can sell you on them, right? But that doesn't mean that they can actually do their job. There's a reason that they left. Validate the reasons for change between roles. That's so important. Whatever they say and why they left each role is a huge indicator of how they're going to perform on your team.
That's a great point. We've got another one here from Steve.
But Marianne, I'd actually like to jump in on
go for it, Ryan.
too. It is because I'll start with the consequence. The consequence when you hire poorly is that now as a sales leader, as a sales manager, now you're having to manage reactively your sales organization and your performance results. So think about how you spend your time as a sales leader. If you're hiring sales staff and they're not performing, now you're either having to work on performance improvement plans. You're spending all your time reactively trying to manage up and improve sales performance, and and affects bottom line results in the end. Is you're spending all that time and you're making little headway. And I think a thing that everybody needs to consider is that top performing salespeople perform at twice the level of average performing salespeople. They perform 10 times or greater than poor performing salesperson. So think about it in terms of math. If you're trying to take a 1 and double their performance, now you get a 2, right? Whereas if you have a sales performer that's performing at a 5 and you can double their sales performance, now you're getting a 10. So those are, that's how you can boil down the consequences. I think the big mistake that I see is in the hiring process is that a lot of sales managers hire soft and then they have to manage hard through performance improvement plans, or saying that we're going to have to separate you from employment if you're not performing well. And it's all because in the beginning they're not really setting the requirements of who they want. And they're not really challenging the sales candidate in any meaningful or functional way, to determine whether or not they can perform the role. So, the solution to that is essentially to reverse that, which is the thing that is opposite of what I usually see, which is the hire hard, hire very hard, be tough, challenge, and then that enables you to manage soft.
Good point, Ryan. We've got this other one here from Steve. Should your company's core values factor into the decision making for the sales candidate, or do Mavericks make better hires?
Marianne, I'll take that one, and I'll take part 2 first and double back, and maybe somebody else can take part 1 because I'm more passionate about part 2. I call them cowboys. Challenger Sale has other names for them, so I call them cowboys. You can hire a maverick. You can hire a cowboy or a lone wolf, as Challenger Sale would call them, if your sales leader can manage that, right? So I've hired plenty of mavericks. I have a very strong personality. Mavericks don't intimidate me or cause me to do anything different than I would otherwise. But I also set very strong expectations with mavericks. I think mavericks make great hunters, but what I say to them is, hey, people like you normally like to do things your way, and I'm going to ask 2 things of you. 1, I'm going to teach you our way, and I'm going to ask you to do it our way for the first 60 to 90 days. If at that point you'd like to meld your way with our way, I've got no problem with that, but as long as you're performing. The minute you're no longer performing, you'll be doing it my way. And so you just need to take a very firm hand with those mavericks. I love having mavericks. They also are disruptive to the team, though. And so, you need to have that conversation. I'm very transparent during the interview process. I'm actually making a formal offer right after this to a candidate up in Madison, Wisconsin. And I said to him, you have a lot more experience than anyone else on the team. That will be intimidating. And so I'm asking you, if something comes up in a group situation that that you have some information or you want to do something differently because you've done it successfully in the past, I would ask you to take that offline. And I had that conversation during the interview. And again, I wouldn't consider him necessarily a maverick, but he has 7 to 9 years more experience than the next closest person on the team. And so that's going to cause team dynamics. I already know it. So we've already started to talk about that with his supervisor, myself as sort of the project manager of the hiring process for them, and the candidate. We've already started that conversation during the hiring process. So do they make better hires? I don't know that they make better hires. I think it all depends on your sales environment, your accountability culture, how strong your sales leader is. Can they come in and be A players and really take revenue and, like Ryan said, take a 5 and be a 10? Absolutely they can. Can they be completely disruptive and hurt morale and damage the rest of the team? Absolutely they can. So I think you need to ask yourself some of those internal questions about what are you willing to potentially give up to bring in a maverick?
Yeah, and I just want to tack on to Christy's points and emphasize those, because when I was hiring, 50-person sales group, it is, you have a lot of individual dynamic in managing that on a day-to-day basis. And so, to reinforce Christy's point is, I always look at total sales performance. And total sales performance is not just your individual sales performance, but it's how you're going to contribute to the team. And if you're, if you're somebody that goes in and takes, sales in other territories and do things that you're not supposed to do, you're upsetting the team dynamic in that case. And if you have somebody that's just like, just leave me alone, I'm going to, do it my way, it's, you're immediately off my hire list. The interview is finished, because you can't, no matter how tempting or alluring somebody's individual sales performance is, it still needs to mesh within the team. And the other piece to what Christy said is what Christy's referencing is the Challenger Sale. If anybody wants to do some research, that is something to definitely research. I think Brett Admonson is one of the authors of the book. And statistically, the lone wolf that Christy was alluding to is not the highest sales contributor overall when you're looking at that maverick function.
So I'd like to kind of expand a little bit on this whole concept of maverick, and I think it kind of really helps to underpin what Christy's talking about. So in the particular assessments I use for pre-hiring and certainly for sales, a couple of things we look at are ambition, we look at interpersonal sensitivity, and we look at prudence. So someone who's high in ambition, low in interpersonal sensitivity, and low in prudence is probably your maverick. Now, I work a lot in medical device and pharmaceutical. Low prudence is kind of scary because those are the people who do things that are against the law. They sell off label. They get letters sent from lawyers. They get fired, right? So it's, you can, clearly somebody can come across as being a maverick, and they can tell you that they can change. They have to want to change. And if your assessment says you're a maverick and you value power and you don't value affiliating with people and you value commerce, you're probably really not going to change your stripes, right? So that's where it's really important, understanding the role. Are you really, and 1099 is going to be completely different than a W-2, right, salesperson. So it's anytime there's behaviors that you say, absolutely, I must have it, or I absolutely can't have it, it's really, really important to use assessments because that's going to get to who the person really is and not, because we all engage in impression management. We can pick that up in assessments. If we're optimistic and trusting of humans, we don't necessarily see that, in the interview, but the assessment will tell you that. And then the other part to this was kind of the core values, I think is what started out. Here's the thing. I see a lot of core values. A core value should have some sort of behavior linked to it. Many don't. So if your core value says we're all about people and supporting the team, and yet you don't hire people that are kind of strong on affiliation and want to help others, if you don't incentivize or motivate that, you're going to have a disconnect. So, it's probably, you probably want to look at, what your sales culture is, because sometimes your sales culture in the sales organization is different than the overall organization.
Yeah, my thought. To tack on to Kim's, comment about prudence is, if you think of somebody that winds up getting your organization sued, that potentially easily wipes out their quota, but could it also wipe out a huge swath of the organizational quota as well? So, understanding, how, somebody could bring legal risk to you in the sales hire is definitely something important that you should be adding on to, your sales hiring criteria.
Kim, I've got a follow-up question for you. Because obviously we do talk a lot about core values with my startup clients, but more about culture. So how do you interview for that? Some of those, a couple of core values that come to mind right away with some clients are success for all, employees, customers, partners, those type of things. I worked for a company here locally called Gainsight, and one of our core values was childlike joy. And so, they sound great. A lot of them sound great, but I think, more importantly, the tips for the attendees today would be, how do I interview for childlike joy?
Well, first of all, okay, I'm going to use this psychological geeky term. It's called behavioral anchoring, and I don't know how to talk about it without doing that. So, childlike joy, explain behaviors to me. So, in my experience, I see a lot of really intriguing, interesting marketing core values that absolutely have no behavior whatsoever. I come from my last corporate job. We had 7 core values. They were all behaviorally anchored, right? So you could be assessed if you were communicating, if you were collaborating. And so it was part of our annual performance review, which, by the way, those are dead. But, at the time, it was part of that. And so versus just being words on a cool poster in the foyer of the building, you were actually assessed on it. And so I think, first of all, before ever trying to hire for your core values, if you can't describe these in behaviors that you can actually assess somebody, get rid of them. because they're just meaningless, and they're open to subjectivity. What you think is childlike joy, I mean, that may look like immaturity and like craziness to me, because we can also measure for hedonism, which is, do people like to have fun on the job? That's another motivator, value, preference. So.
Well, and I'll just add into that too is, when I coach sales representatives, I coach the behaviors, right? I don't coach to, well, I may have to coach their mindset if it's a little bit, if they're angry or something along those lines. But, I'm primarily coaching the sales behaviors. So why would I not hire the sales behaviors as well?
That's great, guys. Really good feedback and answers here. We've got another one from David Schenberg. Delivering commercial insights is a hallmark of challenger sales, and why we lean hard on it at WWT. Those that have demonstrated how to take a leadership position in complex sales are high on our list of recruits. Anybody have any comments?
I think.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the gist of that.
I think it was just feedback. I don't think it was a question necessarily, but I would say, just to tack onto that, so WWT is worldwide technology, so that's where he's coming from.
Okay.
But challenger sale, here's what I would say. I love challenger sale, but if the entire company isn't on board, most importantly, not only the sales team, but the marketing team as well, if the marketing team, because it gets back to his point, which is, commercial insights, right? And so what are we teaching our prospects that they didn't already know before they met us? And so I think challenger sale, although I love the concept and I love several parts of it, I think it's very hard to implement if it's not a company-wide sort of initiative. I always say that everyone's in sales, right? I mean, everyone that a prospect or customer comes into contact with, and even if it's internal sales, so everyone in your company is truly in sales in one way or another, whether they like to admit that or think about it that way or not, but they are. It goes back to, I think Kim mentioned, your brand, like making sure you don't damage your brand, or, the company's reputation. But although I love challenger sale, it's not for everyone. And I think it's a very hard philosophy or methodology to implement if just the sales team's trying to do it by themselves.
And, something that I might add on the sales methodologies is they're all very niche, right? Whether you're talking about target account selling, whether you're talking about challenger sale, whether you're talking about Sandler, there are pieces in all of these methodologies. Spin selling is another one that are very, that are very effective. They're all very niche, and what I mean by that is that your organization is unique. You have, a unique way, whether you know it or not, about going about your marketing and your sales and how you align your marketing and sales effort that is unique, and really understanding, the various pros and cons of the sales methodologies and really drawing out from each. There's valuable things that you can take from spin selling that are, that could be valuable to your particular, organization, and you can also draw elements from challenger sale as well. But the thing about it is, it's probably most important, to what Christy said, is, now more than ever, your marketing and sales efforts have to be aligned, and so however it's built, the marketing team needs to be on board with it, and the sales team needs to be on board with it as well.
One model that I've found that I think does a really great job of that is the insight selling model. It's from the RAIN group, and they specifically talk about your value proposition. And what was unique about how they developed their methodology is the research that they did. And instead of going to organizations and saying, tell us about your top-notch salespeople, and trying to capture factors or characteristics about that individual, they went to purchasing agents and buyers across the United States and said, tell us about the individual who got the business, and tell us about the first loser. Well, the first loser is the second place finisher. And it was really, really interesting. And this is actually a model, it's my go-to model because I love the methodology. and because they make it so simple really to utilize. But they came away with specific behaviors. One about the value proposition is that you had to be able to resonate with your prospect. You had to be able to differentiate yourself from others, and you may have to substantiate it. So that's just, things about the value prop. So you bring that in from the marketing. The sales side of it, they've got a lot of great content as well in terms of connecting with people, building rapport. A surprising factor is the winners really understood that there was a lot of risk on the prospect's part that wasn't being expressed. They knew it, and they knew how to handle it without creating more concern. So that was one of the key takeaways that I think a lot of us don't necessarily realize, is that unexpressed concern and risk in this.
Thank you, Kim. Why is it so hard to retain good salespeople? That's our next question. How is that? Okay, Chris, do you want to add something?
I'm laughing, but I want Jamie to answer this because she and I have spent hours discussing this.
Yes, I would be happy to. I think it's hard for companies to retain their top sales team because they don't, there's a variety of things. They don't hire the right person perhaps in the beginning, or they don't support them and allow them to make enough money. Your top salespeople want to have an uncapped commission model. They want to feel supported. They want to have flexibility. When you talk about culture and alignment, it's most of 90% of your workforce sits behind a desk all day, but your salespeople are in the field. They should be treated that way. They have a different criteria. They shouldn't be expected to clock in and clock out and be micromanaged. A lot of times it just comes down to their commission plan is capped out. They get offered more somewhere else. They don't have a good leader or manager. People leave managers more so than companies. And then the third one is if somebody's not treated fairly, or they don't have options that allow them to be successful in their role. I mean, Christy, obviously you can add on to that too.
And I'd love to tag on as well. Go ahead, Christy, please.
I was going to say, one of the mistakes I made early on, I've been a SaaS sales leader for almost 20 years now, and prior to that I was a retail sales leader. One of the mistakes I made early on that I corrected as I got older and wiser was treating everyone the same. I call it A-player privilege. And if you don't give your A players that word flexibility that Jamie said, it's A-player privilege. You earn it, but it's there, and it's not for everyone. There are higher achievers. There are people who are providing more value. But the other thing I think is valuing them, is making sure they understand and feel valued. But as I got further in my career, A players got A-player privilege, as I called it, and they earned that right. And as long as they continue to earn that right, it was there for them.
I agree totally. There are many different variables that affect retaining top sales professionals. In my experience, unrealistic expectations being placed on sales professionals can affect retaining professionals. Also, top talent is always being sought after. And I hear that quite often from people that I'm engaging with, is that, hey, I have 50 emails from recruiters in my inbox. What do you have that's worth my attention? And so I've seen where there's pressure, placed on sales professionals to close business in an unrealistic time frame, or they're asked to cover a territory that was not initially discussed in the role, or they may be new to the industry, and those unrealistic expectations, that adds pressure to the candidate or the hire, and it ultimately makes them feel uncertain, and it affects their performance. And then in other cases, I've seen where sales professionals have had tenure in a position, and they recognize that perhaps their voice is no longer valid, and there's a new kid on the block or a fresh meat. And so they become unmotivated for whatever reason, and they passively start to look for a new role. When you're being approached by a recruiter, there's something exciting about it. It resuscitates you. You become desired again. And so you tend to believe sometimes that the grass is greener on the other side. And also to speak on sales professionals being sought after, I am a hunter, and I'm constantly hunting and engaging and looking for top talent. And I'm constantly establishing trust and finding out what that candidate's sizzle is. Like, what is your motivation? What is it going to take? Because my motto is, whether if it's now or in the future, my goal is to assist you with placement. So when you figure out that sizzle, whether if it's incentive, whether if it's money, whether if it's a vehicle, that is truly what separates, you know, people who will stay in the company and who will leave an organization.
So I have something I'd like to add on into this is, you know, especially when it talks about managing for retention, to tack on to Christy's point, you know, for your B, C, and, you know, the time you spend on D and F players, which I would say not a lot of time you want to spend on them, you know, you're looking to coach them up to the next level. With your A players, you're actually looking to do something entirely different, which is to remove roadblocks. And, you know, when you're not removing roadblocks, you're basically, you know, making it harder for your salesperson to, you know, top performing salesperson to go out and do their thing and increasing their frustration. But the number one reason, this hasn't been addressed yet, that top performing salespeople in particular leave organizations is not because they're not making enough money. The number one reason why top performing salespeople leave organizations is because their compensation plan keeps changing. You ask any sales representative, you know, what aggravates them the most. If they're a high performing sales representative, it's that they keep changing my compensation plan. So if you can't get your compensation plan right, because guess what? Your top performing salespeople aren't looking, you know, to you. You know, they don't really even consider, you know, you as anything more than the mechanism by which they get paid. And if you're constantly changing that mechanism and they can't get settled and build their engine to take advantage of their sales compensation plan, they're going to find some place that has, you know, where the compensation plan is more stable. And that's really the number one reason why sales, you know, professionals, top performing sales professionals leave sales organizations.
Yeah, I'd like to add on, Ryan, that's a good point. And if you're looking at your compensation model, I don't change it, but if you try not to pay sales reps lump sum, the ones like SaaS companies have reoccurring commissions. Any way that you can pay them reoccurring, monthly, quarterly. I tend to avoid an annual lump bonus. There's tons of reps that resign after they receive their annual bonus. They hit their number, they have to start over next year at ground zero. They wait till they get that big check, and then they're calling me and asking me when they can make a move. So if possible, if you want to, as a company, retain your people, figure out how to pay them consistently over time so they have no reason to leave you.
That's a great point, Jamie. Kind of going back to the sales team, what does an effective sales team look like? Should you only have A players? Should you have B players? Like, what is the mix?
I would say every company wants all A players. That's not reality. If you find me A players, I mean, does anybody see that? You want to, I say you want to retain your A, support and grow your B players, and keep your C players on a plan or constantly be interviewing to replace. As a good sales manager, you should always be interviewing because somebody's going to leave you at some point. But everyone's going to have a mix. I haven't met a single company that has all of one of those categories.
The vast majority of an effective sales team is not how many A players they have. It's how many B players that can be coached up to A level. And even the C players have value because they're coachable, right? It's, you know, think about if you had all A players, you know, it's like the equivalent of having 5 Michael Jordans, you know, on your basketball team, right? It's how well are they going to play together? So there's other factors to consider when you're thinking about the construct of your sales team versus, you know, just the individual performance. You have to also be considering the team dynamic And, when you're hiring, your most ideal A player is the one that gets their individual performance, but can also help you lift others up on the team as well.
I totally agree.
Okay, thanks. Why should we test for sales potential in the hiring process, and what our organization? I think I'm reading this wrong because I can't see. So what should we test? What should you test for sales potential in the hiring process, and what should organizations be testing for?
Kim, this sounds like a you question.
Yeah.
Right.
So in terms of, and I'll speak to just kind of overall behaviors that support high revenue generating sales effort is, first of all, do they have drive? So are they ambitious? Can they build relationships? So people who don't like people probably are not going to be good salespeople, right? Do they display confidence? Believe it or not, part of being a really successful salesperson is showing up and displaying confidence, because others develop trust in you, right? So other things that we're going to look at, how well can you influence others? Again, because you're influencing somebody to buy. So those are some sales behaviors that we would look for. And I'll just speak for myself. I use personality assessment to get at that, right? So certain characteristics of personality come together to tell us if you're going to be good at building relationships, if you're going to drive for results, if you basically have an overall sales focus. There's some tried and true things. You want people who are ambitious. You want people who can handle some stress. You want people who like people. You're going to want people who have some interpersonal sensitivity, although not too much. I recently had a situation where I was working with a client, and one of the pre-hire candidates was like 100% on interpersonal sensitivity. And the concern about that is that you don't push, that you take no, and that becomes the final answer. She was also extremely low in adjustment, like almost a 2, which means she'll be very self-critical, she'll be very nervous, not displaying confidence. She didn't show up like that in the interview. So that just goes to show you how we can impression manage in an interview, but these tools can tell us otherwise. He calls me up 4 months later. Well, I'm replacing so-and-so. What happened? He goes, you warned me. And I said, I don't like to be right about that, but it does reinforce the value and the predictive nature of the assessment. What happened? She wouldn't push. And this is a Northeast company in the medical device space, right? So she was very nervous. She wouldn't push the physicians. If they said no once, she backed away, and it just wasn't the right fit. And he said, you told me, but she was the only person I had at the time. And so sometimes being needy and not having a lot of good options forces people, and I've seen this happen. It's the best or the worst,
I'd like to add on, I think a huge skill set for salespeople is resourcefulness and adaptability. One of the assessments a client of mine uses, most people have seen the DISC or the Divine assessments. They test for resourcefulness. And a good sales rep, the A players know how to get something done. They don't understand no. They find a workaround. They find a gray area. Good salespeople live in the gray. Your accountant should be black and white. Your sales rep should be resourceful. So that's an adaptability. There are questions you can ask around that, like tell me about a time when you were asked to do something that you've never done before. How did you figure that out? I think those are huge behavioral questions that I like to dive into for sales reps.
I also think the other thing, and again, I come from this from an earlier stage company point of view. We just terminated a sales leader recently that I too, Kim, warned the founder about and said it's not a good fit. And one of the reasons why that it became apparent pretty quickly is lack of adaptability and flexibility. Well, welcome to the startup world where we're pivoting and changing messaging and test driving new verticals or beta testing on a like what feels like a day-to-day basis. And when we went back and the founder took full responsibility and said, can we postmortem this? And so we set up an hour to postmortem the situation. And I said, pull up the original assessment and let's review that. And it was blatant. It was blatantly clear. He wanted structure. He wanted standard operating procedures. He wanted all of the things that we were never going to get in a startup. And so I think, a startup in their first 18, 24 months will be different than that startup is going to feel in 5 years, right? And so, when you're under 20 employees versus 55 employees, even that amount of size of company makes a huge difference, and you're formalizing and structuring things along the way. But even though he had prior sales management or leadership experience, he'd never done the startup. And so missing that startup competency was painful, right? I mean, 2 employees quit in his tenure. And so when, going back to the question of what does this hire cost you, in this case, it cost 3 employees. 1 we had to terminate and 2 that quit on their own because of the one we terminated. And recovering from that as a small company at $1 million in revenue is extremely painful and hard lessons that you'll never forget, but lessons that didn't need to happen.
Yeah, I just might add to that comment is, I don't think that structure itself is bad, even in a startup organization and founding one. Structure, there's elements of structure that are a good thing, but it can't be the same level of corporate structure that exists, in a large enterprise. It's, they're 2 completely different things.
I use the term, I say, in a startup, you have to be more willow than oak.
Yeah. That's a great analogy.
You have great sayings, Chrissy.
Yeah, we can definitely assess when it comes to motivators, values, and preferences. We can definitely assess where someone falls on the security. So if they are really low risk, high security in a startup, they're probably not in a good situation. Or even an established company with a new product launch in a different vertical, they may not be the right fit. We can assess for tradition, must they do things the usual traditional way, or are they more willing to do things a little bit differently? And we do find people who sometimes are low security, I'll take a risk as long as there is some standard around it, and so we can kind of tailor that individual to the right role in the right company.
Thanks, Kim. It looks like we're almost at time. We've only got a couple minutes left. Could you guys all give quick 20-second, here's my top things you need to do to hire the right sales team? Kim, do you want to start?
I'm just going to go back to my initial statement, great job description, identify the competencies, use a recruiter, have a standardized process, and use third-party assessments that are scientifically validated.
Awesome. Angie?
Yes, I think in all cases, if you want to hire for a specific skill set and minimize wasting any time or frustration of going through applicants that you've received from a job board, you want to hire a recruiter. Recruiters typically have a portfolio of talent. They've got relationships, and if they don't, they have the means to recruit for that specific role on your behalf. I know in my own experience, I have a firsthand, my hand is always on the pulse of what's going on in the industry, who's passively and who's actively looking for a new role. And so I'm aware of who the top producers are. But with that being said, not all recruiters are considered equally. It is critical that, you find a recruiting partner who understands your culture, understand the role that you're hiring for, and that they add value to your organization. That's what I'll add.
Thanks, Angie. Christy?
Yeah, I think we didn't spend as much time today as probably we could have on formal interview process. So please have a formal interview process. Please have a structure. So these are the 5 steps in our interview process. Please try to include the same individuals every time. So I think the other thing that's really hard for people is to evaluate 4 or 5 different candidates is when you've got them talking to 4 or 5 different people within the organization. So make it as apples to apples as you can, not only for, as Kim pointed out, legal reasons, but so that you can truly apples to apples compare each of the candidates. The more formalized your process, the easier your life becomes, because you start to hear the right answers and you know what those are to certain interview questions. So I would encourage you to, before 2021, create a formalized interview process for your sales hires.
Jamie?
Yeah, I would add, just to reiterate, don't hire from your gut. Just don't do it. Sell your company on the candidates. Have a good reason and a drive for someone to want to come work for you. Have a good compensation model that they're excited about, and validate their performance metrics in the past. Make sure they actually can do what they said they can do.
Good advice. Ryan?
I was actually trying to find a place to insert this at the top of the conversation. But as much as we're all tempted to leap forward into the hiring process, as it regards sales professionals, I would, maybe, recommend taking a step backwards to take, big steps forward. And basically what I mean by that is understand and know what you need. What are the conditions of the positions? What resources do we have to allocate to support and successfully onboard this person? What is our history of hiring? Do we have good retention or do we have high turnover? What do we want to accomplish in the interview process? So really, gaining a sense of where you are and what your requirements are and how to get from point A to point B, and actually plan and map that out is going and do that first before you ever sit down, start, engaging with a sales recruiter or engaging in the interview process is really going to be, a big help in making sure you have a successful outcome.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, guys. So we're going to wrap up. Thank you for joining us today, and we welcome all your feedback. All of our contact info is up on the screen here. You can feel free to reach out to any of the panelists, and they will be happy to answer your questions. Connect with them on LinkedIn. Email. It's been an honor to be your moderator today. And please check out our next one on 12/15. We'll be talking to business owners about successful succession planning and transition planning for your business. Have a great day, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, guys.